US President Joe Biden has warned Russia could use nuclear weapons as Moscow faces mounting setbacks in its war with Ukraine. Ukrainian forces are making significant counteroffensive gains as they try to liberate Moscow-occupied territories.
President Biden warns the risk of nuclear, quote, armageddon is at its highest in decades as Russia continues its attack on Ukraine. Moscow has alluded to the possibility of using nuclear weapons after suffering setbacks on the battlefield. At a fundraising event on Thursday, the president said of Russian President Vladimir Putin, quote, he's not joking when he talks about the potential use of tactical nuclear weapons or biological or chemical weapons because his military is, you might say, significantly underperforming.
The reality is that if he did use a nuclear weapon, I don't see how the United States and NATO would not respond to that.
But as recently as this week, Pentagon officials said they don't have information that would require a change in the alert posture of U.S. nuclear forces.
We don't assess that President Putin has made a decision to use nuclear weapons at this time.
In Ukraine, Russia is facing mounting losses in its 8-month invasion. Ukraine's military says it recaptured roughly 200 square miles of territory this week. The gains have been primarily in the Kherson region. President Volodymyr Zelensky vowing to liberate those areas still under Russian control.
The day will surely come when we will report on successes in those areas that are still under the control of the occupiers.
And in an apparent rebuke to Vladimir Putin, activists from Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia won the Nobel Peace Prize today.
Well, joining me live is Alex Shephard, staff writer at the New Republic. Thank you so much for joining us, Alex. So let's talk about this story. They mentioned that he's not joking. It is the highest nuclear threat since the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. Bring us up to speed on what you know. I mean, they said that the military is underperforming. What is your take on this?
Yeah, I think the big concern in the Pentagon right now is that the Russian forces are in retreat at this moment. Vladimir Putin, I think, is politically in quite a bit of trouble. I think he's called up reserve forces. He started to draft people. I think there's quite a bit of pressure on the Russian army to get moving, and I think that there's growing calls within the Kremlin to use tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine. And I think within the Biden administration, there are quite a lot of different approaches about what they think that should do if Putin does this. I think there are some people in the administration who think that there should be some form of reprisal. I think there are some people who think that nothing should happen. But I think the big concern here is what this does from a precedential standpoint if Vladimir Putin were to use tactical nuclear weapons. And I think that this is, I think not just as Joe Biden said, a risk of Armageddon, but on a smaller scale too. This is a conflict that's also, is threatened to spill over Ukraine's borders at various points and become a kind of third world war, or at least a sort of continental war in Europe. And I think that there's a growing concern of that as well, particularly should Putin escalate even further.
And it's interesting, isn't it, Alex, how they did say that the military is underperforming, and we're seeing the partial mobilisation moving into that region. But yes, certainly what we are hearing, it is the most serious threat as yet since the start of this invasion 8 months ago.
Yeah, that's correct. I think that, most military advisors, I think, are very concerned about a lot of the noise within the Kremlin at this point. There are a lot of hardliners that are advocating for taking decisive and serious measures. And I think most seriously, using nuclear weapons. And then I think very clearly they're even with tactical nuclear weapons, which are sort of smaller scale used in combat situations. The concern is that very quickly things could escalate into, nuclear conflict or even Armageddon.
Well, let's turn to Hurricane Ian, which is described as the deadliest hurricane to hit Florida since the 1935 Labor Day hurricane. The death toll is increasing. There are still hundreds and thousands of people without power after 8 or so days of the hurricane. What else are we needing to know about this system, Alex?
And this is, the biggest hurricane, as you mentioned, to ever hit Florida. It made landfall as a Category 4 hurricane with winds of 155 miles an hour. The storm surge was, I believe, up to 18 feet. So the destruction here is massive. The death toll, well over 100. And you're just seeing, this rise and rise. And again, it's hard to say specifically which which hurricanes are climate change related, but Hurricane Ian is a massive, massive storm. We saw Joe Biden down in Florida earlier this week. I think there is a lot of federal effort to clean up for this, but the implications are going to be profound here, I think, particularly along Florida's coastline, which has just really gotten walloped, particularly in the Tampa area.
The midterm elections, Alex, November 8. Is it too early to call yet?
I think that there are some things we can probably call it. It seems pretty clear that Republicans are going to take back the House of Representatives. That's been quite clear for a while. Earlier this summer, I think in part due to the backlash to Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health, the ruling that overturned Roe versus Wade, you saw Joe Biden also signing an infrastructure bill and a spending bill, sort of a green energy bill. The Democrats had quite a bit of momentum for most of the summer. They're starting to lead in a lot of key senatorial races, particularly in states like Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Wisconsin. What we've seen in recent days is those races have started to tighten. John Fetterman, who's a Democrat in Pennsylvania, was leading by as many as 10 points in some polls. His lead over Dr. Oz, a sort of slightly pseudoscience-y TV doctor, the Republican candidate, is down to 3 or 4 points. So I think what we are seeing is momentum sort of shifting towards the Republicans as the race gets closer. I mean, the voting is about 4 weeks away now.
All right. And what are your thoughts on the big news that came through yesterday on Biden taking executive action to pardon the simple federal marijuana convictions?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is something that certainly a lot of activists on the left have been calling for quite some time. I think a lot of criminal justice reformers have also been calling for. I think this is a huge step in sort of modernizing federal marijuana policy. I think it's also a sign of Joe Biden shifting with the political wind of sort of recognizing that moving more towards leniency and with marijuana convictions in particular is a winning issue for Democrats. Republicans are reluctant to do it because they like to be seen as a sort of anti-crime party, but I think for Biden, this does seem to be a winning issue. It's very, very popular, and I think again, it's good. It's good politics, frankly.
And also, Alex, the number of COVID cases in the US still, by the looks of it, they're declining. But we're hearing that there are signs of a potential new wave moving through into Europe. There's also a concern of long COVID. People are saying it's time to get your booster. Tell us what's happening in the US there.
Yeah, the biggest, I mean, I think in general in the U.S., most of the sort of public safety measures have just completely fallen off. Even here in New York, where we sort of kept masking much longer, you now see only maybe 20 or 30% of people masking on the subway. But I think that there is concern about this wave in the winter, and particularly there's concern about people not getting booster shots. I think right now only 4% of Americans have received their sort of second booster shot. And again, there isn't really a lot of public health push from the Biden White House to do this. I think in part because they want to say that they want to take credit for reopening the country after COVID, which again is something of a misnomer. COVID is very much still around us. But one of the things that you've seen is there hasn't been the same kind of push that there was, for instance, last winter during the Omicron wave for people to get boosted. And what you're seeing is a very, very, very low number of Americans that are currently boosted.
Interesting, isn't it? And currently, we're just looking on Biden's Twitter feed just in the last half hour or so. He has written with Inflation Reduction Act, they're lowering energy and healthcare costs and paying for it by making corporations pay their fair share. Congressional Republicans want to repeal the law spiking costs and killing the clean energy manufacturing jobs our investment creates. So what is your take on that?
I think this is an issue that Democrats are trying to run on the midterm elections, this sort of large clean energy bill. I think the case that they're trying to make most importantly is that this bill is reducing inflation. Inflation is the number one issue as voters go to the polls here in America. It's more important than anything else, including reproductive rights and voting rights. So I think the Biden administration is trying to make the case that the spending bill will lower inflation. There's little economic evidence that that's the case, but as a green energy bill, it's pretty good. It's certainly the most substantial green energy bill that we've seen passed in this country. Now, when you talk to sort of climate change experts or scientists, they will say that this is not nearly what this country needs to do to prepare for rising sea levels and rising temperatures, an increase in natural disasters like we saw with Hurricane Ian, but this is what the Democrats are going to run on, and Republicans, meanwhile, have been hammering this bill, saying that this is not the time to pass a large spending bill given inflation.
All right, yes, plenty to cover, and you do it so well as always. Thanks so much, Alex Shephard. Great to see you.
Thank you.